The Federation calls itself the United Federation of Planets. The name implies unity, the Charter implies consensus, the Starfleet Manual implies restraint. But none of those words mean anything without the machinery underneath them. The Federation does not survive because it believes in its rules. It survives because the rules perform a specific function. They contain something. What they contain is not disorder. What they contain is the Federation itself. Strip away the Prime Directive. Strip away the chain of command. Strip away the legal protocols governing contact and intervention. And what remains is not chaos. What remains is a species that won the local galactic arms race and no longer knows what it is optimizing for. The rules do not prevent the Federation from falling apart. They prevent it from becoming efficient in the wrong direction. They are the load-bearing structure of a civilization that has spent 3 centuries learning how not to act like the enemy. The question is not whether the Federation can survive without its rules. The question is whether it would still recognize itself. On screen, the Federation breaks its own rules constantly. Captains violate the Prime Directive. Admirals authorize covert operations. Entire wars are fought using legal exemptions that would horrify a constitutional scholar. But the Federation does not collapse when this happens. It adapts. It rationalizes. It creates carve-outs and exceptions and situational doctrines that allow the action to proceed while the principle remains intact on paper. This is not hypocrisy. This is load testing. Every time the Federation bends a rule, it is testing whether the rule was structural or decorative. And the answer matters because the decorative rules can be discarded, the structural ones cannot. The simplest reading of Federation history is that it is a post-scarcity liberal democracy held together by universal principles and enlightened self-interest. That reading is incomplete. The Federation is held together by a legal architecture designed to slow down decision-making just enough to prevent the wrong decisions from becoming irreversible. The rules are not aspirational, they are friction. And friction is the only thing standing between the Federation and the version of itself that solves problems the way the Terran Empire does. This is not about moral decay. This is about what the Federation optimizes for when no one is watching. The Federation does not operate on trust, it operates on procedure. Procedure is what allows a captain in the Gamma Quadrant to make a first contact decision without needing to consult Earth. Procedure is what allows Starfleet to maintain a fleet capable of projecting force across 16 sectors while insisting it is not a military. Procedure is what allows the Federation Council to vote on matters of war and peace without devolving into factional violence. The rules are not there to make the Federation good. They are there to make it predictable. Predictability is what allows a coalition of over 150 member worlds to function as a single political entity without a centralized autocracy. The moment the rules stop functioning, the Federation stops being predictable. And the moment it stops being predictable, it stops being a federation. The Prime Directive is the most visible rule, and it is also the most misunderstood. It is not a moral principle. It is a strategic doctrine designed to prevent the Federation from inheriting problems it cannot solve. Every pre-warp civilization that the Federation contacts becomes a dependency. Every dependency becomes a vulnerability. Every vulnerability becomes a pressure point that hostile powers can exploit. The Prime Directive exists because the Federation learned, somewhere in its early history, that intervention creates obligations faster than it creates stability. The rule is not there to protect alien cultures. It is there to protect the Federation from the consequences of its own benevolence. But the Federation violates the Prime Directive constantly. In A Private Little War, Captain Kirk arms one faction of a pre-warp species to counterbalance Klingon interference on the other side. The official justification is that the Klingons violated the Prime Directive first, and therefore the Federation is permitted to restore the balance. The real justification is that Kirk believes allowing the Klingons to dominate the planet unchallenged is a worse outcome than the Federation becoming complicit in a proxy war. The decision is framed as a reluctant necessity, but the pattern underneath is clear. The prime directive is waived the moment the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of intervention. That calculation is not made by the Federation Council. It is made by the captain on the ground, using guidelines that are deliberately vague enough to permit discretion. This is not an accident. This is the system working as designed. The Federation cannot afford to have rigid rules enforced uniformly across all contexts, because the contexts change faster than the rules can be updated. A captain operating 3 months away from the nearest starbase cannot wait for a ruling from the Judge Advocate General's office. The rules are written to allow that captain to act, and then to justify the action retroactively if the outcome is favorable. If the outcome is unfavorable, the captain is court-martialed and the rule is reaffirmed. The system is not built to prevent violations. It is built to make violations survivable. But survivability depends on the rule still existing. If the rule is suspended entirely, there is no retroactive justification. There is only the action and its consequences. In Insurrection, Captain Picard defies direct orders from Starfleet Command to prevent the forced relocation of the Baku. The official Federation position is that the relocation is legal under a treaty with the Sunna, and that the metaphasic radiation in the planet's rings represents a resource of extraordinary strategic value. Picard's position is that the relocation is morally indistinguishable from ethnic cleansing, and that the Federation is betraying its own principles by authorizing it. He is correct, but he is also insubordinate. He abandons his post, commandeers a starship, and engages in armed conflict with Starfleet personnel to enforce his interpretation of Federation law. The interesting part is not that Picard wins. The interesting part is that Starfleet does not court-martial him. The decision not to prosecute Picard is a tacit admission that the rule he violated was less important than the principle he defended. But that admission only works if the rule still exists. If Starfleet had formally authorized Picard's actions in advance, it would have set a precedent that captains are permitted to ignore lawful orders whenever they believe those orders are immoral. That precedent would make command authority unenforceable. The only way the system survives is if Picard is technically wrong but retroactively vindicated. The rule is preserved, the principle is preserved, and the Federation avoids having to choose between them. But the mechanism only works if both still exist. The chain of command is the second structural rule, and it is more fragile than it appears. Starfleet operates on a model where captains have enormous discretion, but that discretion is bounded by the expectation that they will follow lawful orders from superior officers. The system depends on captains trusting that their orders are lawful and superior officers trusting that their captains will execute those orders in good faith. When that trust breaks down, the chain of command does not bend, it fractures. In the Pegasus, Admiral Pressman orders Captain Picard to recover a prototype cloaking device from a destroyed starship in violation of the Treaty of Algeron. Picard is told that the mission is classified and that he is not authorized to question the legal justification. He follows the order until he discovers that the cloaking device was part of an illegal weapons development program and that Pressman covered up the deaths of his own crew to protect the secret. At that point, Picard stops following orders. He informs the Romulans of the treaty violation, destroys the prototype, and arrests Pressman. The decision is framed as a moral victory. But the mechanism underneath is a command structure that relies on individual officers refusing illegal orders. That only works if the officers are capable of recognizing which orders are illegal. And that only works if the legal framework is clear, consistent, and enforced uniformly. The moment the legal framework becomes situational, the individual officer is no longer interpreting the law. They are making policy in real time, with no oversight and no accountability except the court-martial that may or may not occur afterward. This is not a sustainable model. This is a system held together by the assumption that most officers will make the right call most of the time. The Treaty of Algeron is a structural rule on the interstellar level. It prohibits the Federation from developing or deploying cloaking technology in exchange for the Romulan neutral zone remaining neutral. The treaty is not popular. Starfleet officers routinely complain that it gives the Romulans a tactical advantage. but the treaty exists because the alternative is an arms race that the Federation might win but cannot afford to fight. The Romulans are not a peer threat in terms of raw industrial capacity, but they are a peer threat in terms of strategic patience. They are willing to wait. The Federation is not. The treaty is a constraint the Federation accepts because it allows them to redirect resources toward exploration instead of fortification. But the treaty only holds if both sides believe the other will honor it, and belief depends on enforcement. The moment the Federation stops enforcing the treaty, the Romulans stop believing in it. The moment the Romulans stop believing in it, they stop honoring it. And the moment both sides stop honoring it, the treaty becomes a dead letter and the arms race resumes. The Federation does not have to formally abandon the treaty for this to happen. It only has to stop prosecuting violations. Pressman's illegal cloaking program was shut down, but only because Picard discovered it. If Picard had not been assigned to the mission, or if he had chosen to follow orders instead of his conscience, the program would have continued, and the Romulans would have eventually detected it. And the treaty would have collapsed, not because the Federation chose to abandon it, but because the Federation failed to police itself. This is the hidden cost of discretion. The rules only work if someone enforces them, even when enforcement is inconvenient. The Dominion War is the largest stress test of Federation legal architecture in recorded history. The war lasts 2 years. It kills billions. It forces the Federation into alliances with former enemies and compromises that would have been unthinkable during peacetime. And it reveals that the Federation's rules are not universal principles. They are peacetime luxuries. At the beginning of the war, the Federation still operates under standard rules of engagement. Prisoners are taken, civilians are protected. Occupied planets are treated as liberated populations rather than subjugated territories. But as the war drags on, those rules erode. In the Pale Moonlight, Captain Sisko conspires with Garak to fabricate evidence of a Dominion plot against the Romulans in order to bring the Romulan Star Empire into the war on the Federation's side. The plan requires lying to a foreign government, assassinating a Romulan senator, and destroying a shuttle full of witnesses. Sisko knows the plan is illegal. He knows it is immoral. He authorizes it anyway, because he believes the Federation will lose the war without Romulan support. He is probably correct. But the cost of being correct is that Sisko has now demonstrated that Federation principles are conditional. The episode ends with Sisko recording a log entry in which he admits that he can live with what he has done. The framing suggests that this is a personal moral compromise, a stain on Sisko's conscience that he will carry for the rest of his life. But the mechanism underneath is larger. Sisko is not a rogue officer. He is a Starfleet captain operating under wartime conditions with the implicit understanding that the normal rules do not apply. He does not ask for permission because he knows he will not receive it. He does not report the operation afterward because he knows it will be buried. The system allows him to act because the system needs him to act. And the system survives because the action is never officially acknowledged. This is not an exception. This is the system protecting itself by creating plausible deniability. Section 31 is the institutional version of the same mechanism. It is an intelligence organization that operates outside the legal framework of the Federation, conducting operations that Starfleet cannot officially authorize. It has no official budget, no oversight, and no accountability. It recruits officers who are never told they are working for Section 31 until they are already complicit. And it justifies its existence by claiming that the Federation's survival depends on actions that the Federation cannot publicly condone. The interesting question is not whether Section 31 is morally justified. The interesting question is whether the Federation Council knows it exists. Canon implies that at least some members of the Federation government are aware of Section 31 and choose not to interfere. In Inquisition, Dr. Bashir is recruited by Deputy Director Sloan, who tells him that Section 31 is authorized by the original Starfleet Charter and that its operations are protected by compartmentalization protocols that prevent oversight. Bashir reports the encounter to Sisko, who reports it to Starfleet Intelligence. Nothing happens. Sloan continues to operate. Section 31 continues to exist. The simplest explanation is that the Federation tolerates Section 31 because it performs a function that the Federation cannot perform openly. That function is not intelligence gathering. Starfleet intelligence already handles that. The function is moral offloading. Section 31 allows the Federation to assassinate, sabotage, and deceive while maintaining the legal fiction that the Federation does not engage in such activities. The organization is not a rogue element, it is a pressure valve. It absorbs the actions that would otherwise force the Federation to admit that its principles are not universal. But the valve only works if it remains deniable. The moment Section 31 becomes an official part of Starfleet, it stops being a pressure valve and becomes a precedent. And the moment it becomes a precedent, the Federation has to decide whether assassination and sabotage are acceptable tools of statecraft. That decision would fracture the Federation. So the decision is never made. Section 31 continues to operate in the shadows, and the Federation continues to pretend it does not exist. This is the most fragile version of the system. It depends on the rules existing even when they are not enforced. The Maquis are a test case for what happens when the Federation abandons its own citizens to preserve a treaty. The Maquis are Federation colonists who settled in the demilitarized zone between Federation and Cardassian space. When the Federation signs a treaty redrawing the border, those colonies are ceded to Cardassia. The colonists are given the option to relocate or accept Cardassian rule. Most choose to stay. Cardassia begins a campaign of harassment, supply restrictions, and low-level violence designed to force the colonists to leave. The Federation does nothing. The colonists arm themselves and begin conducting raids against Cardassian targets. The Federation declares them terrorists and orders Starfleet to stop them. The official justification is that the Maquis are violating the treaty and that their actions risk dragging the Federation into another war with Cardassia. The real justification is that the Federation values the treaty more than it values the colonists. This is a rational calculation. The treaty prevents a war that would kill millions. The Maquis represent a few 100,000 people, but the calculation only works if the Federation is willing to sacrifice its own citizens to maintain the peace. The Maquis do not accept this. They argue that the Federation has abandoned them and that they are therefore no longer bound by Federation law. They are correct. But correctness does not change the outcome. The Federation hunts them down. Starfleet officers who join the Maquis are court-martialed. The organization is systematically dismantled, and when the Dominion invades and wipes out the remaining Maquis colonies, the Federation does nothing. This is what happens when the Federation prioritizes stability over loyalty. The rules are preserved, the treaty is preserved, and the people who believed the Federation would protect them are dead. The Maquis are not an anomaly, they are a preview. The Federation's rules are designed to be flexible enough to survive contact with reality, but flexibility has a cost. The more exceptions are created, the less the rules mean. The more the rules are bent, the less they constrain. And the less they constrain, the more the Federation begins to resemble the powers it defines itself against. The Romulan Star Empire does not have a prime directive. It has strategic objectives and the willingness to pursue them without moral hesitation. The Klingon Empire does not have a chain of command based on lawful orders. It has a hierarchy based on personal loyalty and the expectation that subordinates will follow their leaders into battle or death. The Cardassian Union does not have constitutional limits on executive power. It has a military dictatorship that openly prioritizes the state over the individual. These governments are not less effective than the Federation. In many contexts, they are more effective. They do not waste time debating the legality of an action. They act, and they deal with the consequences later. The Federation cannot operate that way without becoming something else. The rules are not there to make the Federation weaker. They are there to make sure the Federation remains the Federation. But the rules only perform that function if they are treated as non-negotiable. And on screen, they are negotiated constantly. Halfway through this investigation, the pattern becomes undeniable. The Federation does not collapse when it breaks its own rules. It adapts. It creates legal fictions, plausible deniability, and retroactive justifications that allow the action to proceed while the principle remains formally intact. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system working exactly as designed. The Federation is not a civilization that follows its rules. It is a civilization that creates rules flexible enough to survive the moments when they must be broken. But that flexibility depends on the rules still existing, and the question is whether the rules can survive being broken too many times. The real test is not whether the Federation can abandon a single rule. The real test is whether it can abandon the concept of rules entirely. In Paradise Lost, Admiral Layton attempts a military coup against the Federation government. His justification is that the Federation is too slow, too cautious, and too divided to respond to the Dominion threat. He believes that a state of emergency is necessary, that civil liberties must be temporarily suspended, and that Starfleet must take direct control of Earth's security to prevent a changeling infiltration. He is not wrong about the threat. Changelings have infiltrated Starfleet Command. They have sabotaged critical infrastructure. They have demonstrated the ability to impersonate high-ranking officials for extended periods. The threat is real. But Layton's solution is to suspend the very legal protections that define the Federation. Captain Sisko stops him. Not because Layton's plan would fail, but because the plan would succeed. A Starfleet-controlled Earth under martial law would be more secure. It would be more efficient. It would be better equipped to fight the Dominion. But it would no longer be the Federation. The Federation is not defined by its military strength. It is defined by its legal constraints. The moment those constraints are removed, even temporarily, there is no mechanism to restore them. Layton believes the emergency powers would be relinquished after the crisis. Sisko knows they would not. This is the clincher. The rules do not just constrain the Federation's enemies, they constrain the Federation itself. And the moment the Federation decides it is too important to be constrained, it has already lost. The same logic applies to the Prime Directive. In Homeward, Lieutenant Worf's adoptive brother Nikolai violates the Prime Directive to save a dying pre-warp species by relocating them to another planet without their knowledge. The plan works. The species survives. But Captain Picard is appalled. His argument is not that Nikolai's plan was ineffective. His argument is that Nikolai made a decision that the Federation explicitly forbids its officers from making. The Prime Directive exists because the Federation does not trust itself to decide which species deserve to be saved and which do not. That decision is too large, too consequential, and too vulnerable to bias. The rule is not there to prevent interference. It is there to prevent the Federation from becoming the arbiter of life and death for every species it encounters. Nikolai's defense is that the rule is wrong. The species would have died. He had the power to save them. He saved them. Picard's response is that the power to save is also the power to destroy, and that the Federation cannot be trusted with that power unless it is constrained by a rule that applies universally. The rule is unjust in this case, but the rule is necessary in every other case. And the moment the rule becomes optional, it stops being a rule and becomes a guideline. Guidelines are not constraints. They are suggestions. And suggestions do not stop the Federation from becoming the Preservers. The Preservers were an ancient species that seeded humanoid life across the galaxy and then disappeared. Canon does not explain why they disappeared, but the simplest reading is that they exhausted themselves trying to manage the species they created. They became responsible for too many worlds, too many dependencies, too many variables. They could not let go. And eventually, the weight of that responsibility destroyed them. The Federation is not the Preservers, but without the Prime Directive, it would try to be. This is the contamination example that scales. Every time the Federation intervenes to save a species, it creates a new dependency. Every dependency requires resources. Every resource allocation requires prioritization, and every prioritization decision requires the Federation to choose which species are worth saving and which are not. The Federation cannot make that decision without betraying its own principles, so the Prime Directive removes the decision entirely. The rule is cruel, but the alternative is worse. The same mechanism applies to the Federation's treatment of artificial intelligence. In The Measure of a Man, Commander Data's legal status as a sentient being is challenged by a Starfleet cyberneticist who wants to disassemble him for study. Captain Picard argues that Data meets the criteria for personhood and that disassembling him without his consent is equivalent to slavery. The court agrees. Data is granted legal personhood. The ruling is treated as a moral victory. But the ruling also creates a precedent. If Data is a person, then every artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to meet the same criteria is also a person. And if artificial intelligences are persons, then they have rights. And if they have rights, then the Federation cannot use them as tools. This is not a hypothetical concern. The Federation uses artificial intelligences constantly. The emergency medical hologram is an artificial intelligence. The Enterprise computer is an artificial intelligence. Every autonomous probe, every tactical simulation, every heuristic system Starfleet deploys is an artificial intelligence operating below the legal threshold of personhood. The threshold is not defined by sentience. It is defined by convenience. The Federation decided that Data is a person because shutting him down was morally intolerable. But the Federation did not extend that logic to every other artificial intelligence because doing so would cripple its ability to function. The rule is that artificial intelligences are persons if they demand to be treated as persons and if the Federation cannot justify treating them otherwise. That is not a legal standard. That is an ad hoc compromise designed to resolve the immediate problem without addressing the systemic issue. And the systemic issue is that the Federation depends on a technological infrastructure that would collapse if it were forced to treat every component as a rights-bearing individual. The Federation avoids this problem by not asking the question, Data is a person, the emergency medical hologram is not. The distinction is based on criteria that are never formally defined because defining them would force the Federation to choose between its principles and its infrastructure. The rules are preserved, the infrastructure is preserved, and the contradiction is buried. This is what the Federation optimizes for when the rules are not enforced. It optimizes for continuity. It chooses the option that allows the current system to continue functioning with the least disruption. That is not a moral failing. That is an institutional survival strategy. But it is also the mechanism by which the Federation becomes the thing it is trying not to be. The Borg are the mirror image of this problem. The Borg do not have rules. They have a single optimization function: assimilate, adapt, repeat. The Borg are not evil. They are efficient. They encounter a species, evaluate its technology and biological distinctiveness, and integrate it into the collective. There is no debate. There is no moral calculation. There is only the function and its execution. The Borg are what the Federation would become if it abandoned every constraint except survival and growth. The Federation's rules are designed to prevent this, but the rules are also obstacles. Every time the Federation encounters the Borg, it loses. Not because the Borg are stronger, but because the Borg do not hesitate. The Federation hesitates. The Federation debates. The Federation asks whether assimilation is truly inevitable or whether there is a diplomatic solution. And while the Federation is debating, the Borg are adapting. The only time the Federation wins is when it stops following its own rules. In I, Borg, the Enterprise crew discovers a single Borg drone and develops a plan to use it as a weapon. The plan is to implant a geometric paradox into the drone's memory and return it to the collective, causing a cascading failure that would destroy the entire Borg network. The plan would work, but Captain Picard refuses to authorize it because the plan requires using an individual as a weapon without their consent. The drone, designated Hugh, has begun to develop individuality. Picard decides that Hugh's emerging personhood outweighs the strategic value of destroying the Borg. The decision is framed as a moral triumph. But the cost is that the Borg survive, and because the Borg survive, they continue to assimilate. The species that are assimilated after this moment are assimilated because Picard chose to preserve a rule. The rule is that individuals cannot be used as weapons without consent. The rule is just. But the consequence is that millions die. Picard made the choice that preserved his principles. But the principles do not comfort the dead. This is not a condemnation. This is the price of the system. The Federation's rules are designed to prevent the Federation from becoming the Borg, but the rules also make the Federation less effective at fighting the Borg. That is the trade-off. The Federation accepts the trade-off because the alternative is worse. A Federation that fights the Borg using Borg tactics is no longer the Federation. It is just another collective with a different name. But the trade-off only works if the Federation survives long enough for the rules to matter. The Dominion War forces the same calculation at scale. The Dominion is not the Borg. The Dominion has rules. But the Dominion's rules are designed to optimize for control. The Founders rule absolutely. The Vorta manage. The Jem'Hadar fight. Every species in the Dominion has a defined role. Deviation is not tolerated. The system is stable, efficient, and utterly incompatible with Federation governance. The Dominion does not negotiate as equals. It negotiates as a superior offering terms, and the terms are always the same. Submit or be destroyed. The Federation cannot submit. Submission would mean accepting Dominion governance, which would mean dissolving the Federation as a political entity. The Federation also cannot destroy the Dominion, because the Dominion is larger, more centralized, and willing to accept casualties that would collapse Federation morale. The only option is to fight a war of attrition and hope the Dominion decides the Alpha Quadrant is not worth the cost. That hope depends on the Federation maintaining its alliances, and maintaining those alliances requires compromises that violate Federation principles. The Federation allies with the Klingons, who use brutal tactics the Federation officially condemns. The Federation allies with the Romulans, who were enemies less than a decade earlier. The Federation tolerates Section 31, which conducts operations that would be war crimes if they were officially acknowledged. The Federation even develops biogenic weapons in violation of interstellar treaties, because the Dominion has biogenic weapons and deterrence requires parity. Every compromise makes sense in isolation. But the cumulative effect is a Federation that no longer resembles the institution that entered the war. The rules are still on the books, but they are no longer enforced uniformly. And the moment the rules stop being enforced uniformly, they stop being rules. They become recommendations. And recommendations do not constrain behavior. They justify it. This is the escalation point. The Federation does not abandon its rules during the Dominion War. It redefines them. The Prime Directive still exists, but it no longer applies to species aligned with the Dominion. The prohibition on biogenic weapons still exists, but it no longer applies to defensive research. The ban on torture still exists, but it no longer applies to interrogations conducted by intelligence operatives under compartmentalized authority. The rules are preserved in name, but the rules no longer perform their original function. They no longer constrain. They ratify. And once the war ends, the rules do not automatically revert. The precedents remain. The legal fictions remain. The infrastructure for circumventing the rules remains. The Federation emerges from the Dominion War victorious, but it also emerges transformed. It is still a federation. It still has a charter. It still has principles. But it also has a history of suspending those principles under pressure, and history is precedent. The risk is not that the Federation will face another existential war. The risk is that the Federation will treat the next crisis as existential, even when it is not. In the Drumhead, Admiral Satie conducts a paranoid investigation into suspected Romulan sabotage aboard the Enterprise. The investigation begins with a legitimate incident. A Klingon exchange officer is discovered passing information to the Romulans. But Sati does not stop with the officer. She expands the investigation to anyone who had contact with him. She questions their loyalty. She scrutinizes their family backgrounds. She treats minor procedural discrepancies as evidence of treason. Captain Picard challenges her. Her response is that the Federation is under threat and that extraordinary vigilance is necessary. She is not inventing the threat. The Klingon officer was a spy. But she is using the existence of one real threat to justify a systemic purge. Picard's counterargument is not that Sati is ineffective. His argument is that Sati is effective in the wrong direction. She is using the mechanisms of Federation law to create a climate of fear and suspicion. She is not violating the rules. She is using the rules. And the rules allow her to operate because the rules assume the people using them are acting in good faith. Sati believes she is acting in good faith. But her definition of good faith is that anyone who opposes her is disloyal. That is not good faith. That is authoritarianism. And the only thing that stops it is Picard forcing her to confront the logical endpoint of her own rhetoric. Sati collapses under the scrutiny. The investigation is shut down. The rules are reaffirmed. But the mechanism she used is still there. The precedent is still there. The authority to conduct loyalty investigations is still there. The only thing that stopped Sati was Picard. And Picard will not be there next time. This is the real danger. The Federation's rules depend on officers choosing to enforce them even when enforcement is inconvenient. That works when the officers believe the rules are just, but belief is fragile. The Dominion War proved that the rules can be suspended when the stakes are high enough. The Maquis proved that the Federation will sacrifice its own citizens to preserve a treaty. Section 31 proved that the Federation tolerates illegal operations when they serve a strategic purpose. The cumulative weight of these precedents is that the Federation's rules are conditional. And conditional rules are not constraints, they are tools, and tools can be used by anyone. The Federation does not fall because it abandons its rules. It falls because it teaches its officers that the rules are negotiable. And once that lesson is learned, there is no mechanism to unlearn it. The final synthesis is this: the Federation's rules are not moral principles. They are load-bearing structures in a legal architecture designed to prevent the Federation from optimizing in directions that would destroy it. The Prime Directive prevents the Federation from becoming a caretaker empire. The chain of command prevents captains from becoming warlords. The treaty framework prevents Starfleet from becoming a pure military. The constitutional limits prevent the Federation Council from becoming a dictatorship. Every rule exists because the Federation knows what happens when that rule is absent. The rules are the memory of every failure, every atrocity, every lesson learned the hard way. Abandoning the rules does not lead to chaos. It leads to efficiency. And efficiency is what the Federation is trying to avoid. A Federation that prioritizes efficiency over principle is a Federation that wins wars faster, expands territory faster, and solves problems faster. It is also a Federation that becomes indistinguishable from the Terran Empire. The Terran Empire is not a dystopia because it is cruel. It is a dystopia because it is the Federation without friction. It is what happens when every rule is discarded in favor of results. And the results are spectacular, until they are not. The Federation's rules are what make the Federation slow. They are what make it inefficient. They are what make it vulnerable. But they are also what make it survive. Because the Federation is not optimizing for victory. It is optimizing for not becoming the enemy. And the only way to do that is to constrain itself even when the constraints hurt. Even when the constraints cost lives. Even when the constraints look like weakness. The rules are not there to make the Federation good. They are there to stop the Federation from becoming something worse. And the moment the Federation stops believing that, the moment it decides the rules are optional, it will discover that the thing the rules were holding back was never disorder. It was itself.